Both of you have worked in newspapers for so long. The Daily Mail, Mirror, both newspapers which over the years will have had so many front pages about the disappearance of Madeleine McCann since 2007, and we have front pages again. I mean, are we, do you think, just on repeat, or does this feel it might be different?
I hope it's different because the agony for the parents must be it's unspeakable, isn't it? But the suspect is being released from prison.
In September, that's right. He's currently in prison for the rape of an American tourist.
Who was 71, 72.
Yeah, and police want to be able to find enough evidence to be able to...
Because they fear the moment he's out of prison, he will vanish.
Look, he's a wrong-un, and he's the German police's prime suspect. They've got evidence linking him to the area, but of course he denies this killing Madeleine McCann, abducting and killing her. You dread to think what else. But they know, the clock's ticking. They say he's the prime suspect, but they've never published all the evidence. They've not charged him.
No. Have they in the past been discouraging about whether they thought they could get to a charge? And so, but they're back again with 30 officers. So it feels like maybe there's something changed.
Feels like make or break. And that's it.
It's the front page of the Mirror this morning. Kevin, are you under the impression that they do have new information, or is this pressured by the fact that the main suspect is due to be released?
I think it's
and therefore German police have applied for this.
Yeah, they're up against the clock. The clock is ticking.
So because if it's a tip-off or new information, you feel like perhaps there's more hope that something new might come out of it. Whereas if you feel like they are simply searching again in a desperate attempt that they missed something the first time, that doesn't feel quite so hopeful.
But I can't believe the German police would send 30 officers. That great cost and time and the resources involved in doing that. If they didn't firmly believe there might be a breakthrough.
Right.
Because can you imagine if it was, just think it was, somebody who had disappeared in Britain, our police would probably lose interest, wouldn't they, if it was somebody from abroad, somebody from Portugal, say. But then you know... That's
the brutal reality.
I mean, well, it is, because you have so many calls on your resources. And there'll be people watching who've lost loved ones, who've gone missing.
Yes.
And thinking, why don't we get this attention? The family, for instance, of Ben Needham.
Yeah.
The little boy who disappeared in Greece. I think it was it the end of the 80s? I think he was 21 months old, but 89 or something. Around there, blonde-haired little boy just disappeared. I think it was Cos, the island he was on. And the search has been renewed in recent years there, but they will feel, and I'm not criticising the McCanns here. I mean, I feel they're getting support and they've got resources, including in the UK, that are denied other families. But I think it's the other families I feel sympathy for, not the McCanns. You've got to... this story captivated people's attention because it was so horrific, and the McCanns themselves suffered terrible abuse from some people who criticised their parenting for leaving Madeleine McCann. And
it split people, didn't it? Because I think it split families who, on the one hand, thought that could have been my child.
That's right.
People who had perhaps been to holiday resorts exactly like the one in Praia de Luz in the Algarve that the McCanns had been on holiday.
It was geared up to look after kids.
That's right. And, this kind of trend that people had got into where their children were asleep in the bedroom and then they went for dinner, and that you would check on the children to make sure they were OK, in the benign sort of confidence that nothing was ever going to happen and that people were doing it all the time. And the other half...
Which, of course, was true. Almost all the time.
Exactly right. Vanishingly rare for this to happen. But then there were the other group of people who said, how could you possibly ever leave your children alone? That is always going to leave them at risk.
Do you remember holiday camps? Was it Butlins? Had a red coat system. And it said, leave your child in the chalet, and they would go and listen at the door and the window. And then if your child was crying, they would put the name up on a screen.
So that's exactly the sort of system that was
when Madeline went
operating
missing,
here.
my mother saying, all this outrage. She said, your father and I left you kids in the chalet in Butlins, and they went to the social dance. I mean, they were only not very far away, wherever the evening...
Yeah, but they weren't in the bedroom, is the point, isn't it?
And there was a red coat patrolling around. But have times changed? Well, I mean, were there paedophiles around there? Of course there were. But, of course, people felt safer, felt they could take that risk. But Mum and Dad never thought it was a risk at all. They thought it was the right thing to do.
I did it once as a young parent. We left our daughter in a hotel. It was in Croatia. We were downstairs sitting out on a terrace in front of the hotel, and we took it in turns every 15 minutes to go up and check. You just listen at the door, but the door was locked.
Yeah.
I mean, that wasn't the case here, was it?
Well, we don't know, do we? Because we don't know what happened to her.
But, but that couple were demonised. And do you know, I can remember many years later, I was at a do in the House of Lords. Theresa May was Home Secretary, and I saw Madeleine McCann was at this event.
Kate McCann.
Kate McCann was at this event, and she was laughing as she was talking to somebody. And I thought, how can she do that? And I then got into conversation with her, and I said, I felt surprised to see you laughing. I'm completely wrong, aren't I? She said, you are, but lots of people think I can never laugh again, I can never behave like a normal mother. I've got 2 kids at home. Totally. Life had to go on, and it still has to go on. And I thought, God, but all the time there,
she's... The perpetual judgment.
Absolutely.
That she and
there's
Zerriat
this flux into mind. What's it to do with me, whether she's allowed to have this was an event, actually, to raise awareness about missing children. But I remember thinking how odd it seemed that she was like, of course she was allowed to laugh.
You are right, the parents are criticised. The police have been criticised as well for the resourcing. You know, one comment today on the iPad from Brenda, why are we spending so much money trying to find this child when we don't on other children missing abroad or at home here? Yeah. But you do, on the other hand, worry that there have been so many different forces involved, so many different experts involved. You always think to yourself, you know, are they going over the same ground? Is there something new? The advantage of the Met keeping one team continuously on this case means that you would think you would have a forensic focus on what we already know and what is
I think the team do other things, but they monitor this case here. There's not just a group of officers dedicated to McCann. Madeleine McCann only. But
they have a continual memory which they pass on within the team.
Yeah. But can I say, when it's a German suspect in jail in Germany, I admire the German police for taking this so seriously. Because it's a British girl in Portugal. The Portuguese police got terribly criticised in the end. They named the McCanns themselves as suspects at one time, completely cleared. Then there was a case of the McCanns tried to sue a Portuguese police officer who then wrote a book about it.
Oh, it's agony.
It was horrible.
It's absolutely agony. And at the heart of it is what on earth happened to a 3-year-old girl.
That's it. That's why
and they wake up today looking at these headlines thinking, are we going to be any closer?
That's why I am
to resolution.
I am pleased the hunt is still on.
Yes.
And you just think there's a slimmest of slim chances that she could be found happy somewhere, abducted by a family, a couple who can have children of their own. That's the fairy tale ending. You fear if it reaches a conclusion, it's going to be horribly grimmer.
Yeah.
But
she'd be 21.
Yeah. In fact, it would have been just her 22nd birthday. Just last month. So all those years and still no answers. But the search begins again this morning, and we will be back with our correspondent on site when it gets underway. Let's turn our attention to... We previewed it yesterday, of course, and it has been trailed for a long time, the Defence Review. Of course, it all sort of blew up in Parliament yesterday. I think the Defence MOD, the Defence Secretary, was criticised by the Speaker for the fact that everybody had heard about what was happening in defence before Parliament had heard about defence. This morning, we understand from one of the key think tanks which looks at the economy, Paul Johnson, the head of the Institute for Fiscal Studies, who said if you're going to increase defence spending by the rate you want to, you've got to be honest about how you're going to raise that money and tell people it is likely to be what he calls chunky tax rises. We know that they are going to reverse the removal of winter fuel allowance. That's going to cost about $1.5 billion. We think...
Depending on how they do it.
True, could be more.
We don't know how they're going to do it yet.
No, and we don't know how much it will cost to actually do it, let alone
But it's a chunk of money.
reinstate it.
It's going to be quite, yeah.
Then we think that they're going to give more help to people who have more children. Currently, there's a cap on universal credit and
although we don't know how they're going to do it.
We also don't know how they're going to do that.
Another rather
or if they are going to do it. Or if they are going to do it.
But if they do both of what you've mentioned,
it's
do it properly, $5 billion straight off.
Two big chunks.
And then we've got this huge chunk for defence. Taxes are going to have to go up, aren't they?
Or they cut spending.
Or they borrow more money.
Or they borrow.
Well, they are going to cut spending anyway.
Yeah, but they have, they have to cut it even more.
Outside health and defence, across all the other government departments, and the spending review next week, it's going to be cuts.
Right,
but these cuts have to be deeper.
But those cuts don't pay for...
Yeah, but if they borrow more money,
right.
that costs us more money because you have to pay for that in interest. And the debt is getting bigger and bigger. Eye-wateringly bigger, the debt.
Thankfully, interest rates are falling. But no, it is. It's more than $100 billion now to pay debt. It was a fraction, was it about a third of that not so long ago? No, it's choices you make, and I think this is the wrong choice. I think it's a reckless choice. You don't need to spend an extra £17 billion on defence. I'm not sure what we really get for it, because we spend so much already.
Well,
and
you
we're
don't. You get a safer
NATO.
country.
No,
That's what you don't, Kevin.
How can you, but how can you can't prove that? You can't show that. If you give money to poor kids, you can show their lives will benefit. If you don't kick away crutches from disabled people by taking away their benefits, you can show there's a benefit on that. If you give money to people for winter fuel allowance, you can see the direct impact of that, because those people get between £200 and £300 each back. You can see with lots of policies the direct impact. You employ more teachers. They're where you used to be in ed. You can see that will improve education. You put more doctors and nurses in the NHS. You see how that improves because there'll be more patients. If you're just building a few more submarines, it's very hard to show that they've kept you any safer.
Kevin, you are a bit of an outlier here, though. Yeah. Because, the generals are saying they want more. The opposition is saying they want more. The two former defence secretaries in the Times today, Ben Wallace and Grant Shapps, both defence secretaries in the last 4 or 5 years. Between us, we dragged our defence spending commitment to 2.5% of GDP. I need to watch Labour shelve the pledge. They say a government that waits for economic headroom before making hard choices may find that deterrence isn't a direct debit you can pause. You pay up front or pay in blood.
Can I just say...
Very dramatic, because, hang on, Kevin, one of the other duties, most important duties of the government is to keep this country safe, to keep its citizens safe. And we've relied for donkey's years on America picking up the bills, and they're not doing that anymore.
Can I just say,
in the last 40 years, we've had major cuts in our troop numbers.
We have.
Well, look, actually, traditionally...
We're now at the level of the Crimean War.
The armed forces have done much better in terms of spending under Labour than they have Conservatives. Because the 2.5% Labour have taken us to, and yes, they wouldn't put a date on the pledge, and then they decided to raid the National Development Budget to fund it, takes us back to where it was when Labour left office in 2010, because the Conservatives cut defence spending as a proportion of GDP, which I think the two Tory defence secretaries completely overlooked. But you call me an outlier. I'm happy to be an outlier, because where is the debate on this? Where are the challenges?
Here, on this programme.
Politically, possibly some people in the SNP, I don't know about Plaid Cymru,
even the Greens are saying we need to spend more money. Even the Greens are saying we need to spend more money. Just Maguire.
Too many people are just going along with this.
Well, it's interesting. A couple of weeks ago, when they first announced that there was going to be more money for defence, in advance of this and unconnected, although obviously connected to Ukraine and Russia, I made the point that the government kept telling us there was a £22 billion black hole, and that's why they had to withdraw welfare benefits. And so I questioned on this programme, how come, if we've got this massive £22 billion black hole, why do pensioners have to fill that hole? But then all of a sudden, when it comes to war and defence, we've suddenly got the money. And we seem to be back there again right now.
If you want to keep people
safe...
Is it...
And the phrase that is used is warfare rather than welfare. And if that is going to be the debate, that I would have thought was a very tricky one for Labour. Yeah. And it's come down on the side of warfare.
Let's be honest about it.
Readiness for war. That's what it says, that review. Readiness for war.
I kept picking up the Tories on this. How are you going to fund it whenever they did it? I'll do the same with Labour. If you're going to spend an extra £17 billion, I'd rather restore the winter fuel allowance, abolish the cuts in PIP, and lift the two-child benefit cap, which puts kids into poverty. It's not about the parents, it's about the kids. Free school meals for everybody, and you'd probably still have a fair chunk left over to reform the justice system.
And who defends this country?
Because if you want to be kept safe in your house, you'd be much better having more cops and a court system that operated rather than is so slow, justice is delayed that long, you don't get justice.
This brings us back to where Susanna started, the Institute for Fiscal Studies comments.
Let's be honest about it,
I mean, at the margin, you can discuss whether you could do a bit more here or there. There is not room for a massive increase in public borrowing. Labour could decide to cut spending on local government and planning and roads and police
well, there'll be a massive rebellion from his MPs if he does.
And we're seeing U-turns at the moment, having attempted to do that. So if you're going to spend the money on the health service and defence and not have these big cuts, is there any way out of it other than saying that there's going to have to be tax rises? Last autumn, the Chancellor said, I'm done raising taxes for the Parliament. Does anybody believe
I don't believe anything
the
Chancellor says. They will raise taxes, and they'll put taxes on people who are earning the most money, and they'll say, very sorry about this, and they'll think it would be politically... There we are, from Maguire. That's fine.
No, what's wrong with putting taxes on people earning the most money or owning the most wealth?
But you don't want to borrow more, and you want to spend more on defence, and you don't want tax rises, and you don't really think we should cut the budget for fuel allowance.
I think we should.
How do you make the sums out?
No, I think we can. I think there should be cuts in the welfare budget because I just struggle to believe so many people are genuinely in need of all this extra money on disability. I just struggle with it. I just understand, how did this happen?
So you're in favour of the cuts to PIP. What about the two-child benefit cap? Because we're going to be debating that this morning with David Mellor, actually, also a former government minister.
Chief Secretary to the Treasury.
There we go. Very senior. Do you... Look, Kevin's point is, with the two-child benefit cap, that it actually means that children are in poverty because you don't necessarily make a decision on how many children you have according to whether you've got the money to support them. Some people just like to have children, 3 or 4, whatever children. And
that's a fact. That's not contested. The two-child poverty cap definitely means child poverty is higher. There's no doubt about that.
I saw a figure the other day saying 180,000 families who are not in work will benefit to the tune, hugely benefit from this lifting the cap. I just don't see why the state is going to continue to subsidise people having more and more children.
Well, let me put Nigel Farage's point to you, which is that we've got a declining birth rate, we've got an ageing population. Somebody needs to produce the children so that they pay our pensions.
Nigel Farage would have noticed there's millions of migrants pouring into this country through the immigration
system. Hang on, millions of migrants pouring into this country.
Half a million last year, a million the year before. That is millions. That will be millions by the time of the next election. They'll be having children.
Come on.
They'll be having children.
OK, so...
Millions.
So it's OK to have immigration so that it pays our pensions?
No, I don't want...
Sorry, I'm now confused. So you're saying we don't need to worry about us having more children because we can rely upon the migrants?
Yeah. I'm saying... No. I'm saying...
Isn't that feels like a bit of a
people are worrying...
turn?
You're tying yourself in knots.
No, I'm not, Kevin. People are worrying...
So you're in favour of more migration or less?
I am not worrying about the birth rate falling because we're seeing a number of people coming into this country. Half a million last year, 550,000 was it? Was it 750,000 the year before? 1 million the year before.
Nigel Farage
a lot of them are very young and they will have families.
Nigel Farage says, Andrew, you Conservatives have had all of this migration in recent years, and that was the wrong solution. We should get migration down instead help people to have more children by lifting the two-child cap.
I don't agree with them.
I know, but if you will the ends, you've got to will the means.
No, I don't agree with them.
But look, in the end, though, this is not about whether people have more children or not. It's about how we treat children. And push children into poverty deliberately will not only cruel and callous, it will blight their lives forever.
But I think
that means we will pay a cost.
Are we going to pay for 3 children,
poverty?
4 children?
We don't know.
5 children?
We don't know what...
6 children?
Carry on.
7 children?
Carry on.
How many are we going to give it to?
There's no evidence that the 2-child benefit cap has stopped people having children, actually.
No,
what all it is
but
doing is punishing children.
It's interesting. There is also a sort of popular, as you know, Andrew, and you would identify, in polling, if you ask people, should families only have the number of children that they can afford,
they'd say yes.
They would probably say yes.
Overwhelmingly.
All right, then,
Which is why Boris Johnson's got 9.
Should the government step in if people have children that they cannot afford, people would probably say no.
Hang on.
But that is what is going to happen.
If we're going to apply this, well, we'll have to scrap child benefit, won't we? Because people getting child benefit are being helped to have children. It's just George Osborne, when he was Tory Chancellor, set the cap at 2 politically. It was all about dividing people.
Yeah, and Labour backed it.
Dividing people. No, Labour didn't back it at the time.
They've been backing it for quite a few years now.
The reason... They opposed it, and then there was criticism when they wouldn't say they would lift it.
Well, we're going to be debating that.
Is there a fundamental values problem for Labour? In the end, if Labour is in power, presiding over a policy which increases child poverty, don't people say...
What's the point of Labour?
What's the point of Labour?
People would say that.
And let's not forget...
You would say that every day.
Well, I'd say it every day. I said last week, there's no narrative for this government. They don't know what they're doing.
The Labour benefit cuts you back and things don't go far enough. We'll put another 50,000 kids in poverty, 250,000 people in all.
Right, we will talk to you again before 9 o'clock. Just before we go, I'm an ambassador for a charity called Palace for Life, which is the official charity of Crystal Palace Football Club. And you may remember that a lovely young man, Aziz Zerriat, who worked as head of community engagement, went missing with his friend Sam Harris in the Dolomites back in January. And Sam's body was found shortly afterwards, sadly. They were experienced hikers and they'd gone off on an adventure. But it has taken until now to find Aziz's body. And Palace for Life shared this statement from Aziz Zerriat's family with me. And I wanted to read it out. Whilst we're relieved to have finally found him, there are no words to describe how heartbroken we are to lose our beloved Aziz. The past few months have been incredibly difficult for everyone who knew and loved him, but we have been comforted by the overwhelming love we've received. We will be eternally grateful for everyone's support. We also want to extend our heartfelt thanks and deepest gratitude to the Alpine Rescue Team, the firefighters, police and volunteers who have all worked tirelessly in challenging and dangerous conditions and whose dedication has led to finding Aziz 5 months after he went missing in the Dolomites on the 1st of January 2025. Being with Aziz was to witness his deep connection with and appreciation of life. He lived every moment with optimism, good humour and humility. He was and still is loved by so many. We will always be grateful for his love, light and joy, which will remain with us forever. So, yes, just terribly, terribly hard. There is a sort of comfort, I imagine, and peace that you now know that both Sam and Aziz can rest in peace because they have been found. But, of course, when you find somebody and, you know, finally the hope is extinguished,
What a dignified statement. And thanking those who kept up the search. But just your heart goes out to them.
Yeah.
And you could just see from the pictures what type of people they were. You know what they did. They're exceptional people.
Died doing what they loved.
Doing what they loved. Absolutely right.
A great season for Crystal Palace, winning the FA Cup, but tinged with some sadness.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you both very much indeed. And my love to both families of Aziz and
see you
Susanna
later.
this morning.